Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Glenorchy City Council on Monday, 31st of January 2022. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Palawa people as the traditional owners and ongoing custodians of this land on which we meet, and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm Beck Thomas, Mayor of Glenorchy and Chairperson of tonight's council meeting. Joining me online tonight is Alderman Sue Hickey, Deputy Mayor Stephen King, Alderman Gay Richardson, Alderman Peter Bull, Alderman Melissa Carlton, Alderman Jan Dunsby, Alderman Kelly Sims and Alderman Simon Fraser. Joining me here in council chambers is Acting General Manager Jenny Richardson and our Executive Officer Bryn Hannon. And joining online also are a number of council directors and staff who are relevant to agenda items on tonight's agenda. We are taking all possible steps to minimise the risk of COVID, which is why aldermen are joining the meeting online this evening, and we don't have any members of the public present here in council chambers, and we are appropriately distanced here in chambers. However, we welcome members of the public joining us tonight via our live stream. Let's take the opportunity to read a work health and safety statement for council meetings. Glenorchy City Council takes work health and safety seriously, and this includes physical and psychological safety. We have a duty to ensure that a safe workplace is provided for employees, elected members, contractors, volunteers and members of the public who may be present at council's workplaces. Council meetings form part of council's workplace, whether meetings are held in person or online, and it is expected that everyone who attends council meetings will behave in a polite and respectful manner, refrain from using offensive or derogatory language or making personal statements, and not be aggressive, threatening or speak in a hostile manner. And this extends to comments on our Facebook live stream. Any disagreement should be expressed respectfully, and during debate and in decision making, we must remember we are elected to represent and serve the people of Glenorchy and to make our city the best it can be. We have 22 items on our agenda this evening, and agenda item 1 is apologies. We have apologies this evening from Alderman Angela Ryan. Agenda item 2 is confirmation of minutes of the open meeting. So I have a recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held on 20th of December 2021 be confirmed. Do I have someone to move these minutes, please? Moved Alderman Dunsby, someone to second? Alderman Richardson? Alderman Dunsby.
Yes, Mayor, I'd just like to ask for a small correction to the minutes. In the apologies, it has a typo in the title of Alderman Fraser. He's an alderman, not an alderman. But apart from that, if that alteration can be noted, I'm happy to endorse the minutes.
Thank you. We will note that correction. Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item? Nothing to close debate, Alderman Dunsby?
No.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 3, announcements by the Chair. I don't have any announcements this evening. Item 4, pecuniary interest notification. Do any alderman wish to express any pecuniary interest tonight, or declare, I should say, any pecuniary interest on any matters on tonight's agenda?
Alderman Richardson, item 19 with regards to YMCA.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Item 19, that's noted.
Alderman King, I may have an interest in the same item, I realise now after further discussion, but I'll discuss that further in closed council if that's all right, and just get a clarification.
Sure. Thank you, Alderman King. Those interests are noted. Any further pecuniary interest to note on tonight's agenda? Alderman Carlton.
Alderman Carlton, yeah. Similarly, interest in item 19, YMCA.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Moving on then to item 5, response to previous public questions taken on notice. There are none this evening. Moving on to item 6, public question time. Obviously, we don't have members of the public here in chambers this evening, but members of the public have been invited to provide questions for public question time via email or via contacting council prior to the meeting. And we received some questions on notice from Mrs. Janice Bryan from Montrose on the 23rd of January, in relation to the intersection between Duncan Street and the highway, Brooker Highway at Montrose. Ms Bryan has asked some questions with concerns about that crossover there, and the answers are provided in the meeting agenda papers. I do note Ms Bryan has asked questions in relation to referring to both the play space and concerns about the play space and the skate park. So I can note in response to the concerns about the traffic and the people potentially increased use of the area because of the skate park project that will be going ahead there this year, that the response to those questions is that Council has been working with the Department of State Growth on the safety of the intersection at Duncan Street, Foreshore Road and the Brooker Highway. Any changes to the traffic flow on the Brooker Highway are managed by the Department of State Growth, and they have advised they are currently investigating the installation of traffic lights at this intersection. They have engaged a qualified traffic consultant to undertake the design work for the traffic signals, as well as any traffic analysis that is required. Department of State Growth has not yet confirmed when the installation of traffic signals will happen, but Council will provide a further update to the community once this has been confirmed, which essentially answers the questions there. So the community will be aware, and Ms Bryan will be aware, we have deferred the play space project at Montrose Bay, so the development of a upgraded playground there, and focusing our efforts on a regional level play space, all the Billy's play space at Gippsland's Reserve. So one of the reasons for that decision was concerns about traffic with increased use if we were to put a play space and a skate park there in particular. So we are progressing with the skate park, having conversations with the Department of State Growth about concerns around the traffic at that crossover, and we'll keep our community updated. I thought it was worth reading that out because I know it's a matter of interest to many people in our community. Moving on to item 7, petitions addressing a council meeting or deputations. Acting General Manager, do we have any this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. No, we don't.
Thank you. Moving on then to item 8, activities of the Mayor. We have a recommendation that Council receive the announcements about the activities of Mayor Thomas during the period Monday 13th of December to Saturday 22nd of January. Do we have someone to move that recommendation? Moved Alderman Bull. Thank you, Alderman Bull. Someone to second? Alderman Carlton. Alderman Bull.
No, I won't. I'll open it to the floor for any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Bull. Any discussion of the item? No. Nothing to close debate, Alderman Bull?
No, thanks.
No. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 9, Economic Development Strategy 2-year update. We have a recommendation that Council receive and note the attached Glenorchy Economic Development Strategy 2020 to 2025 implementation report for March 2021 to January 2022. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Moved Alderman Richardson. Someone to second? Alderman Fraser. Alderman Richardson.
No, thank you, Mayor. I'm more than happy to move this motion. We were all delighted in Council receiving the Best Economic and Resilience National Award. So full credit to the Director of Economic Development and her team for producing the strategy and winning the award. It's wonderful to see the artworks from the local artists as we cycle up the cycleway. The Glenorchy Jubs Hub has landed its 100th job placement just a few days ago, which was wonderful. And small businesses activation improvement grants were very welcome from small business in Glenorchy. And hopefully we look forward to the Marine and Innovation Master Plan being realised in not too distant future. So well done, to a job well done. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey.
Can I just ask the Director, given the drastic increase in property values, I would assume that that's going to have a major impact on the gross regional product annual growth rate, i.e. the net wealth generated, or does it not affect it?
Director Fox.
Thank you for the question. I will defer this to my Manager of City Strategy and Economic Development, who is an economist. I'm not an economist, so I'm afraid I don't understand the data that well. Erin McGoldrick, are you online?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Alderman Hickey. The short answer is no. Those asset values increase. That's a reflection of the increase in the value of it. Unless it's a commercial asset and is taxable supply and sold, it wouldn't be included in the GRP.
Thank you.
Any further discussion of the item? No? I would like to thank council officers for preparing this report to not only demonstrate the progress to Alderman, but also to our community that we've made in the last 2 years. When we endorsed the Economic Development Strategy 2 years ago almost, it was the first time council had an economic development strategy in 30 years. So it's really great to see how much progress we've made and how our economic recovery program has contributed to the increased activity through what was a really difficult period for our businesses in particular in our community. We can see the highlights that Alderman Richardson has mentioned that are also outlined in the report, really making a difference. The initiatives there for our community from both an economic and also a social perspective as well, and really changing the vibe in Glenorchy. So I'm certainly very proud of the work that our team has achieved here, and in particular the winning national awards. You know, we are showing that we are leading the way nationally in economic development, which is something to be very proud of. I look forward to continuing to see the actions in the strategy progress, and I know that the figures for our economic growth targets will be available to us in a month or two's time, and so we look forward to those coming to council, hopefully giving us some more things to celebrate come a month or two's time as well. So very pleased to see this report come to council and proud of what we've achieved. I'll go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to go to the vote.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Please raise your hand if you are for the motion. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 10, determination of planning applications 2021. We have a recommendation that council receive and note the report outlining the significant increase in planning applications determined in 2021 to 580 applications, including approval for 662 multiple dwelling units. It looks like we have a mover, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you.
Seconded, Deputy Mayor, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. As part of the Glenorchy Planning Authority, we received this report at our last meeting, and the information that is contained in this is absolutely significant, and I felt it was useful to put a recommendation through that it comes through to the council meeting and can be seen in a wider audience around our community as well. As you mentioned, we had the highest number of determinations we've ever had, as in 580, and the multiple dwellings of 662. This is a significant increase in the growth in our municipality, but it also has had significant impact on council in terms of the effort of the staff to get these planning applications through in the periods of time that are legislated, but that they've added that professionalism to the opportunities for people, both domestic and business, to interact with our council. So I'm very happy to put this motion forward. Encourage people to actually read all the statistics that are included in there. I feel they'll find it interesting reading, and throw it open to my colleagues for further discussion.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey.
Do we have a start date of the Claremont development with the 315 or whatever it is units?
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Dr. Fox.
Sure. So the planning permit was provided in March of last year, of 2021, and so they had 2 years to complete that to undertake substantial commencement against that permit. We do understand there's been some works to slash the grass and to do some works around the buildings on site, but substantial construction has not yet commenced. As you would know, it's very clear that there's significant limitations at the moment in the construction industry in terms of tradespeople. So we don't have a start date as yet, but as I said, the permit gives them 2 years for that substantial commencement.
Yes, thank you, and I do appreciate that, and it's beyond the control of council. I guess the problem is, the exciting news is we've got lots of applications. That's brilliant, but the difficulty is it's still not roofs over heads as yet. So, but it's more hopeful than we've had for a long time. What percentage of these are social housing, i.e., investment by the government? Is it roughly around 50% or less?
Director Fox?
I don't have that number in front of me, but given that sort of 300 odd of those developments are associated with Windermere Bay, which is not social housing, not social and affordable housing, I would suspect it would be less than half, but I can get that number for you.
Thank you. Yes, just for personal information, I think it's good to see how much the state government's investing in our electorate, or particularly in our city, for social and affordable housing. But anyway, thank you and congratulations on the report.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item?
Alderman Sims,
yes.
just through the Mayor, I'd just like to celebrate the tool that demonstrates our status and progress in this area. I think it's a great report. It clearly communicates where we're at to the community, and it'll be great to see more like it in this type of format across other areas as well. So just a bit of feedback, thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any further discussion of the item? I'll just add, as my colleagues have mentioned, it's very pleasing to see this level of development progressing in our city, although, as Alderman Hickey notes, it's not yet converting to roofs overheads. This is definitely the first step, and having approvals for 662 multiple dwelling units, and then on top of that, single dwellings as well, equates to over 800 new dwellings to be constructed in our community. And as we heard Director Fox say, the development applications provide that the applicants have 2 years to commence work. So that is a relatively short time frame, although we needed more housing yesterday. It's a start, and it's really pleasing to see. I know, as Alderman Dunsby said in opening the discussion, that this increase in development applications has placed a lot of pressure on council staff. So it's really important that we recognise their efforts and recognise that they are working under quite significant pressure with not necessarily a greater amount of resources than they had to assess a lot less applications that we've had over recent years. So it's very pleasing to see and recognise the efforts of staff, and very grateful to see people wanting to invest and develop and live in our great city of Glenorchy. Go back to the mover, Alderman Dunsby.
I think you stole my sum up, Mayor, so thank you, nothing further.
I apologise. Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 11, delegations to streamline planning permit assessments. We have a recommendation that Council delegate Council's relevant functions and powers under Section 57 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 to the positions of Coordinator Planning Services, Senior Statutory Planner and Senior Strategic Planner as outlined in the table. And note, for the avoidance of doubt, that the changes to the delegations as a result of the resolution in paragraph 1 supersede any previous delegations given under section 57(2) and 6 of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 to the positions of Coordinator Planning Services, Senior Statutory Planner or Senior Strategic Planner, and do not in any way affect any other delegations currently given to the positions of Coordinator Planning Services, Senior Statutory Planner or Senior Strategic Planner under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993 or any other act. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? No mover?
So moved.
Moved Alderman Fraser. Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Someone to second. Deputy Mayor, Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'll be short and sharp. I do support the recommendation here to further the delegations for planning officers. I think the important factor to weigh up here was, transparency, public transparency and accountability versus the efficiency of the planning department. You could argue that we are trading one for the other here slightly. However, in my view, planning officers are really the people driving planning decisions at the end of the day anyway, perhaps more so than members of the planning authority. So I'm not really sure much changes here at the end of the day.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion? Alderman Hickey.
I actually had some big reservations about this. I'm prepared to accept it, but one of the big reasons for having municipal councils is the planning. That's always been the great argument about having control about the environment, where the houses go and what impact they're going to have and all of that stuff. I do, however, believe that the officers have far more experience than anybody who sits on a GPA unless they've been there for 20 odd years. But I was a little bit concerned that it would equate to 111 hours for planning officers and 55 hours for administration officers to prepare the paperwork, given that the paperwork must exist anyway. And it's just a matter of presenting it to us. I mean, we'd be happy to have it in another format if it made it easier, but I don't see where the saving is. And I think I read somewhere it was about $2,000 saving overall in the year, which quite frankly is rats and mice considering some of the other things. I also have issues about significant developments. I note that Clarence only joins as a whole council for projects over $10 million, but it doesn't say whether, oh yes, it does say planning staff have delegation. So I'm reluctant to release the most critical function of a council to officers, but I bow to their wisdom anyway. And having witnessed the Glenorchy GPAs, everything gets approved anyway, or only everything is followed on officer instructions. So it's really a moot point. Very few things are argued out, as I've seen in the Hobart City Council, where, a fence can have opposing points of view and sunlight access and all sorts of things that can be argued and thrashed out, and lots of amendments are made, and sometimes things are sent to the tribunal. And I think we've only ever had one thing go to the tribunal in the life of this council. So it's not like the council actually challenges robustly the officers' advice. So that's why I'm prepared to bow to their skill set. But I do have an argument with the amount of time as a justification for this. The only other criteria is because the GPA only meets once a month and not once a fortnight, obviously that's going to hold things up and is not an efficient way for a council to deal with planning developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Sims.
Yes, through the Mayor, thank you. I have a few questions and just in forward a lot of what Alderman Hickey has just raised. Also, those are some of the things that I've considered, and then even stepped back further and above to assess the Local Government Act and our role regarding to LUPA. So just to confirm, and to be clear for the public as well and the community, that this motion in regards to section 6.3 of the Land Use and Approvals Act 1993, that council staff are seeking strategic approval to expand upon the current delegations for senior planning staff in aim of improving the timelines for determining applications in relation to planning permits. And that by resolution tonight, if passed, as a strategic body, we will be delegating the functions and powers to staff as outlined 1 to 3 in the proposal on tonight's agenda.
You're just wanting to clarify that's the...
Can I just have confirmation of that, if that's correct?
Sure. Director Fox?
I believe that's correct, Alderman Sims.
Thank
And
you.
we do have Lyndall Byrne online, who's our Senior Strategic Planner as well. If you have any detailed questions around the legislation, we did get advice from our Senior Legal Counsel as well, just to check that we were right with the legislative references there.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Director Fox. And just for the record as well, the report also notes that Council has recently delegated function and powers under Section 56, 57 and 58 of the LUPA directly to senior council staff in aim of supporting a more user-friendly and streamlined process as well. So I do have a couple more questions. Seeking information over and above that's reported in the agenda, or following on from what other councils do, which to me wasn't clear or typical in pattern. And regarding point 1 and 3, not point 2. Point 2 was reasonably clear cut and less risk for us either way when it comes to outcomes. So in regards to point 1, it reads that the new delegations can be enforced if the time in which the planning authority must grant or refuse a permit will expire prior to the next scheduled meeting of the Glenorchy Planning Authority, and the applicant has refused to grant an extension to that time period. So what's stopping applicants from using this process to avoid GPA assessment and scrutiny, or to better suit their needs over and above the council and community?
Director Fox?
That's a very good question, Alderman Sims. So what that condition means is that, as you've said, if the time elapses, so we have 42 days to assess an application, if that time comes to an end and we haven't reached a decision or made a determination on the application during that time, the planning staff have the delegation to make that decision. So if a GPA meeting hasn't been scheduled within that 42 days, what we would normally do is approach the applicant and say, can we have an extension on that 42 days until the GPA meets, if it's to go to the GPA. What an applicant can do is refuse that extension and say, no, they refuse to grant that extension, and then we must make the decision under delegation. So an applicant could use that process if we're getting towards the end to have the decision not go to the GPA. I think does that answer the question? We're not actually proposing to change that condition at all.
Clarify for the record that there's nothing stopping the applicant from doing that.
There's nothing stop. Yes, if we pass the 42 days and we seek an extension, they can say no. Yes.
Right, so we're opening a loophole for
No, that's I'll just clarify that that's already the case. That's right.
That is already the case.
So
Yes.
we're not changing.
We're not changing anything there.
And
No, it's already the case.
In my opinion, changing the delegation, though, we just clarified that above.
Sorry, I might have spoken incorrectly there. So that first condition, if you have a look in the attachment, that first condition around the extension is not being changed under this recommendation.
No, but yeah, okay. In effect, the delegation will go to staff now, not to GPA, and they can avoid that. In my opinion, that's what can occur, and arguably the community will see that as an area that could be a risk for exploitation. So that's my opinion.
Just to clarify, Alderman Sims, that's currently the case, so we're not changing that. So, and that's what is required under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. So we have no discretion over that. We can't change that. It's already the case.
At the moment, they've been asked to come to GPA. If we change the delegation tonight that's within this motion, that will go to staff and they can avoid GPA assessment. And that's what
they can do that already. Yeah, so they can do that already. So if an applicant refuses to extend the time frame under the current system that we've been operating under, if an applicant refuses, the matter gets decided on delegation. That is already the case. Is that right, Dr. Fox?
Yes, that's correct. There's no change to that. That is already the case.
And we can't alter that because that's what the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act stipulates.
I understand. Yeah, I understand. And this delegation, again, will link to that as well. So us moving that to staff, I think is just another layer that... Anyway, I have another question around point 3. It appears to rely on a number of community representations before GPA members are formally briefed. It's important to reflect and set a standard at this level. It's our job to undertake due diligence as a council to, justify the integrity with the planning and development outcomes for our local area. We as a strategic level should be providing a consistent benchmark for land use and planning within the local area that not only meets the needs of staff and applicants, but also the community, council and environment. Using the current lack of community engagement via GPA representations as a guide, standard or basis for internal process is extremely, in my view, arguably irresponsible and concerning for all stakeholders for several different reasons, especially when also considering the following agenda items that are somewhat relating and linking to this that we have just discussed. So my second question is, what additional evidence, research or data does Council have in providing evidence-based justification that our current level of community representation is at the strategic capacity required for governing council process, or using it as a benchmark, or for lack of a better word, trigger for such an important role?
Sorry, Alderman Sims, can you just clarify your question again?
Yep,
what
sure.
evidence?
So my second question is, what additional evidence, research and data does Council have in providing justification that our current level of community representation is at the strategic capacity required for governing council process, or using a benchmark or trigger for such an important role? So basically placing that important process and trigger of it on the amount of representations we receive from the community. Because some of the items I've had to scrutinise in GPA haven't even received representations, and later were an issue when the community had realised what had occurred. So I think it's important that there's a benchmark or a process in our role as a GPA to be assessing some of that at that point.
Okay. Director Fox, do you have any comments in response to that particular question around representations?
I'll make some brief comments, and then I will ask Linda whether she had any further comments, because she's much more in the detail than me. But my understanding is that we adhere to the requirements of LUPA in terms of advertising those applications and receiving any representations received. The applications are assessed not only against what representors information, what is provided by representors and what their views are, but importantly against the planning scheme and the, as you very, very well known, and we've seen repeatedly in GPA, against the provisions of LUPA and the planning scheme. So we certainly adhere to LUPA and the public consultation required. The public consultation is only one aspect of what we need to consider in considering whether to approve or not approve or recommend approval of a planning permit. Lyndall, did you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Sam, and through you, Chair. I guess the issue is that there doesn't really seem to be a significant pattern as to when we get representations or not. Sometimes we can have a substantial development and it doesn't receive a lot of representations, and other times it might be what you might think of as like a minor application, and it receives a lot of community interest. So we were looking, I guess, to benchmark. We looked at what Hobart, Clarence and Kingborough do, being other kind of city councils, and as the report indicates, both Kingborough and Hobart look at 3 representations and Clarence looks at 1 representation. So we've looked at the breakdown of applications based on representations received, and also looked at those other issues relating to works, etc., and still sought to maintain, I guess, for some key elements which would need to be considered by the GPA, like cost issues, car parking, and larger kind of multiple dwelling developments.
Thank you, Lyndall. Any further questions, Alderman Sims?
Hey, through you, Chair. It's the Manager of Development, Paul Garnsey here. Just to add a couple of comments to that. Firstly, that a lot of representations we receive are not around things that we can consider under the planning scheme. And so this will actually prevent, I guess, some of those going through to GPA. The other thing I would say in terms of engaging with the community and their rights is that the amendment to these delegations does not in any way, shape or form take sort of amend council's responsibilities for following the statutory process and advertising the applications in the first instance. It doesn't also impact on the ability for representatives to lodge an appeal. So it doesn't take away any of their rights whatsoever. The fact that it may or may not be going to GPA now. So applicants will still have the ability to go, I'm still not happy with that, and I can still appeal the decision in the tribunal.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate that explanation. And I do have all faith in our planning staff. I understand they are the experts. We're guided by them at a different level with a different process that we undertake. It's over and above that. But I do appreciate that, and it's absolutely no reflection on our staff. It's more about us making sure we're conducting our due diligence. And I'm still concerned around us having that reliance on the representations and number of them and whether they come to GPA. So that's my concern. But thank you for your explanation. I appreciate the planning staff and all they do. And they're very well known around the state for being very good, and we're very lucky. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Do you have a question, Alderman Hickey?
I do. Actually, I have two, if that's okay, Mayor. The first one is of Director Fox. Given and don't actually have an issue with passing over these delegations as such, but do you see a time where there may not even be a GPA meeting for lack of anything to go on the agenda?
I haven't had that happen in my time with council, and given the significant number of developments we currently have on our books, I can't see it happening in the near future, even if these delegations are passed. Paul, I'm not sure, or Lyndall, if you have a different view, but certainly from my perspective, it's not something that I've contemplated.
Well, the reason I ask that, if it's going to save 111 hours of officers' presentation time and 55 hours of whatever the other one was, attendance, I assume it's going to save time on GPA meetings as well, because a lot of the stuff that previously would have gone to GPA will now go to the officers.
Yes, that is the hope, and that feeds into the next agenda item as well, I suspect. So it is hoped that it will reduce the number of items going to GPA. Whether that means that we can then cancel GPAs, it's yet to be seen.
Okay. All right, I'm not certain how I feel about that. As I said, it's a significant power of councils to dictate the environment of their community. But anyway, we can only do so under the laws, and I know the officers obey those. I guess the other thing I'd like to ask as a question is, Hobart City Council would give all of the aldermen a quarterly report of everything that was approved by officers. Whether it was a shed, it had the value, the address, whatever the addition was, etc., etc. So I think from a governance perspective and oversight point of view, and also for transparency for the community, if that was to be presented as a quarterly report in our council papers, is that something we need to move an amendment for, or do you have horrible objections to that suggestion?
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. It is something we've had discussion about, and we did start receiving those reports at GPA. Dr. Fox, would you like to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor. We do prepare those reports. We have been a little bit delayed in the last couple, just with the number of applications we've received. But yes, we do prepare those reports quarterly for GPA, outlining all of the decisions made, including those made under delegation. with a full list. If council would like, we can certainly put that report up to a full council meeting each quarter.
I think that'd be a good idea for governance, but do we need an amendment to put that in, or will you just do it automatically?
They have been received by GPA, and obviously, although all aldermen don't participate as members of the planning authority, we are all proxies and we all have access to the papers each time the agenda comes out. So that has been how the full council has had access to that information up until now. Dr. Fox, do you see any issues with changing that?
Look, I will be guided by you. I'm comfortable to proactively put them up to a full council meeting, or to put them into the GPA folder in Info Council and Teams and other, whatever you would like. I'm in your hands.
Thank you. I just note we have had in the past discussion about this and been concerned about the privacy of applicants' information, because obviously if it doesn't trigger a discretion, an application doesn't need to be advertised and public don't need to be notified of applications. So I know we have had quite in-depth discussions about this in the past around transparency and sharing this information with the community, but then the privacy side of it as well. So I'm interested in views on that from both a planning and a governance perspective, I guess, as well.
Perhaps we could just report it in the closed. I'd be happy with that, but it's more about the oversight of the entire council viewing these decisions.
Okay, sure.
And the value of them too, because I think it will give us a great deal of comfort in the work that we're doing, that at least we've overseen it.
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm happy to take that. And I don't think we necessarily need a amended motion for that, Acting General Manager. No. What do you think, Director Fox?
No, I'm comfortable with that. We'll put it into the closed section of the meeting. That's good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm broadly in support of this recommendation. I did have a couple of questions regarding some of the figures in the report, so if I can ask those through you. So on page 28 of our report, we get a review of what this would mean against the 2021 GPA data. And in that, we are provided with information around if councils, senior planning officers could determine applications receiving up to 3 representations. An additional 37 applications could have been decided under delegation. Please excuse us.
Oh. I thought it was the computer.
Mayor, perhaps if I could just take a minute and come to my question.
Sure. Alderman King.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to add a little bit of discussion. I'm broadly in favour, but the comment was made before about how quickly some of our approvals go through, etc., and almost like the rubber stamp. But I've been involved with the Planning Authority for many years, and we've had a very efficient, it just needs to be known, we've got a very efficient staff who give us fairly in-depth reports, and we've had opportunities to ask them questions if we're confused about something prior to the meeting, not to make decisions prior to the meeting, but to be updated or to be clued up on something that we're not all that with. So I thank them for their in-depth reports and making it easy for us to make decisions in most cases. There certainly have been cases when we've had robust discussions and disagreed with council staff, and the staff have taken it very well, and that's part of the whole process. And so I just thought we should add that to the discussion so the public understand that there is a lot of work goes into these things prior to them coming to the meeting itself.
Could I just have clarification though? You haven't overturned any decision of the officers. That's the difference.
Yes,
you
we
can have all the robust discussion you like, but if you don't overturn it.
Yes, we have.
Once. I asked this question of the General Manager recently, and with one thing, and it's mainly because of cost.
I'm talking about in my time. No.
Yeah, well, that's a long time ago.
No, there was a recent one in Mary's Hope Road that we overturned, and I remember others as well.
I'll ask
So-
the General Manager if there was one. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you, Alderman King. Anything further, Alderman King?
no, I'm good, thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton, you're back.
Thank you, and please accept my apologies. So my question was around on page 28. We've been given the data for up to 3 representations, and the actual recommendation itself is the delegation would be for 3 or more than, or 3 or less. So 3 or less. So it's a slightly different number to what's actually in the report. So in the report, if it's less than 3 representations that our planning officers can actually have the delegated authority, that would actually result in 37 of the 56 applications not having to go to a GPA. So if we were to approve the recommendation tonight, which is that slightly different one, which is the 3 or less, of the 56 applications, if we look at the 2021 data, how many of those would have actually have come to council? So based on what we see in the report, I've calculated that 19 would have actually have come to council if the delegation, which they talk about there, we would have actually have had go to GPA. So 19 of the 56. But if it was actually what is in the recommendation, how many of those would have come to council?
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Dr. Fox?
Just trying to catch up with you, Alderman
Yeah.
Carlton.
Sure.
Lyndall, can you? I do know it is a little bit confusing. We are talking about 3 or less being decided under delegation, and 4 or more being decided at GPA.
Yeah.
So I know it's a little bit confusing in the language.
So
Lyndall,
what-
did you?
Thank you, Sam. Yes, through you, Chair. I think that section really is focusing on those 10 applications for 4 or more dwellings when we were looking at the less than 3 representations. And yes, I don't have those exact, I guess, stats here to work through how many applications it would have resulted in, but I think what we were trying to look at there in the report is just to give like a general idea about how many applications over a year would have been, if these delegations were in place, would have not needed to go to the GPA, and so how much time that would have given back to the planning staff to focus on other making decisions on other applications and doing other kind of administrative work and issuing planning permits. So yes, I agree, it is confusing in that sense that I've used a different formula.
That's
and
okay,
I can
and I
provide
just-
those stats for you, but I just don't have them at this moment in time.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm broadly in support of this recommendation. My ultimate question is, we've heard about what happens in other councils, and it seems that where we are going, which is 4 and more, is different to what other councils are doing, where they say once you get to, if there's 3 representations, it goes to GPA. So I'm just wondering why we've landed with the going with a greater number of representations that need to be received compared to the benchmarks that you've shared with us tonight?
Through you, Chair. So my understanding from the other council areas were that when they get 3 representations, yes, they do more than 3 representations, that they take that to their GPA. So the recommendation here is where 3 or less opposing representations are received, we have delegation. And so if we have 4 representations, then it would go to the GPA.
Okay, so are you saying that's the actual benchmark? So the figures that you shared earlier from the other councils, is that it's it's 4 representations and it goes to GPA, or is it 3 representations and it goes to GPA?
It's 4. So they have delegation for 3. The planning staff have delegation for 3, and for 4 it would go to their planning authority.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Anything further?
Mayor, can I just ask another question? And this is possibly for review into the future. If it gets to a point where there's only, 1 or 2 that are going to be going to GPA, maybe the council could form as a GPA within the council meeting structure like it does at Hobart City Council, rather than having separate little GPA meetings for 1 or 2 approvals, or subject to the timing, of course, which is going to be under its own will with that.
Thank you. We can certainly take that into future consideration. I think obviously there's a review of local government occurring this year too, so I think that will take a close look at the role of councils in planning, and who knows, it might determine these questions for us. Any further discussion of the item? No, I would like to contribute to the debate. I appreciate the robust discussion that we've had on this particular item and the recommendations before us in relation to delegations. In our December council meeting, we had an item around housing and noted the urgency of increasing the supply of housing in our municipality of Glenorchy, noting there are so many people in need. One of the key aims associated with changing these delegations is speeding up approvals, and speeding up approvals means speeding up getting roofs over heads, and certainly there was consensus around the table when we've had discussions around housing, and we're putting pressure on state and federal government ministers to do what they can, and this is one thing that we can do as a council to contribute. It's not the only thing, but it's one thing that we can do to contribute to getting more roofs over heads sooner. We've talked around a number of issues this evening. We've talked about the number of matters that come to GPA that are challenged or go to appeal, and certainly we might have some different perspectives on that. Certainly from my perspective, having matters not go to appeal is a sign that our planning officers really rigorously assess applications and work really closely with applicants to ensure that their applications, when they come to council, do meet either the acceptable solutions in our planning scheme or the performance criteria. The officers present very comprehensive reports to us, as a planning authority, and they are the technical experts, as Alderman Hickey said earlier. Certainly when often they are coming to us with very few discretions, and discretions that are quite minimal, but because of the discretions they will trigger coming to GPA, and we're trying to, and in which case it can look like rubber stamping because there's not much discussion because the discretions are quite minimal and it's quite clear that performance criteria are met, in which case the GPA is obliged, wearing our hat as a statutory body, not an alderman, but as a statutory body under the Land Use Planning and Approval Act. We are obliged to assess applications in accordance with whether they meet the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act and our Glenorchy planning scheme. We are often conflicted in our role as a planning authority because we have community members coming to us saying they don't want this development to go ahead because they don't want that many houses in their backyard or units in their backyard, or for some other reason they don't like the size and scale of the development or whatever it might be. Quite often though, the representations that come to us are things, as Paul noted earlier, that we don't have discretion over. So we are torn as aldermen. We want to represent the voices of the people we represent in our community, but in this particular role as a planning authority, when we sit as a planning authority, we are there to perform a statutory role and assess applications under the scheme. That presents real challenges for us. Often, as I say, the representations aren't linked to discretions under the Act or the planning scheme. and therefore, they don't lend themselves to being overturned or to appeal. And noting also appeals cost quite significant money to our ratepayers when things do go to appeal in legal fees, not to mention the applicants and representors when they're engaged in that level of activity as well. In terms of the saving, the amount of hours that officers spend and that we as a planning authority spend as well, considering sometimes quite minor discretions, will be a saving to council. And I know Alderman Hickey referred to an amount of $2,000, but in fact, I think that's for the item 12, which is another planning authority related matter. I don't think the amount in terms of dollar figures was stated in this report. Dr. Fox, can you just clarify that for me?
No, it was not. You're correct.
So we talked about the amount of hours. The report talks about the amount of hours, administrative and planning officer hours that would be saved, but it's not quantified in a dollar amount. But I expect it would be much more significant than $2,000. As I said, in response to a question just before, the local government review of local government sector in Tasmania will also consider the role of planning. So I think that's going to be opportunity for us to discuss some of these questions and issues we're raising tonight at a whole of sector level as well, and I look forward to that opportunity as well. We take our role as a planning authority, as I say, very seriously as a statutory role. We're not politically motivated in these discussions and that we have at Planning Authority, and I think that's another reason why we don't see a lot of applications going to appeal and going to RUMPAT, and I see that as a really positive thing. We work with developers and representors in a really collegiate way, and quite often when representations are received, our planning officers will talk to the applicants about what some of the concerns are, and quite often those concerns are mediated either before they get to us at GPA, or sometimes within the GPA meeting itself, where we'll hear applicants and representors having a discussion and additional conditions being put on applications to mediate some of those concerns. So certainly I'm very confident in our planning process and think that this will streamline things and, as I say, get roofs over heads sooner and be a saving to council and is a win-win all round for everyone. So I'm very supportive of the recommendations before us. Also supportive of Alderman Hickey's suggestion that the quarterly reports of all approvals come to closed council. So thank you for that. There's no further discussion. I'll go back to the mover, who was Alderman Fraser.
I don't think I can add anything more of value. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is Alderman Richardson, Deputy Mayor King, Alderman Fraser, Alderman Hickey, Alderman Carlton, Alderman Bull, Alderman Dunsby and Mayor Thomas. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are against. It's Alderman Sims. The motion is carried. Moving on to item 12, adoption of revised 2022 Glenorchy Planning Authority meeting times. We have three recommendations before us. The council note the council decision of November 2021, which adopted dates and times for Glenorchy Planning Authority meetings in 2022, with meetings scheduled to commence at 5 p.m. Adopt the meeting dates and revise meeting times for the Glenorchy Planning Authority for the 2022 calendar year that are set out in attachment 1, whereby future meetings are scheduled to commence at 3 p.m. And note that the General Manager will ensure a public notice containing the times and places of the ordinary council meetings and Glenorchy Planning Authority meetings is published in accordance with Regulation 7.2 of the Local Government Meeting Procedures Regulations 2015. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Moved Alderman Dunsby. Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Seconded Alderman Fraser. Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you, Mayor. I have thought about this quite a bit, and for me, a lot of the information that comes before the Glenorchy Planning Authority is business orientated, or it might be a builder or somebody who may come and make representations on behalf of their clients as well. So it's predominantly a business-based consultation area, and I think it's possibly better held within the business hours. I would hate to see that anybody might be precluded from attending when they had a representation or it was their matter that was coming up before it, but for most people, that's a one-off. It's not like it's going to affect them regularly every month for their attendance or non-attendance at a meeting. I do have a question though. We currently don't have a process where we allow anybody who's a representative or anybody who has part of the process to appear before through video link, through Teams or the processes, the electronic connections. Is that a process that we cannot entertain legally, or is that something we could adopt to enhance the ability of this meeting going to 3 p.m. and anybody that could not get there in person could appear by video technology? Perhaps a question for the General Manager, Acting General Manager.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Yes, it is something that we can look at. We don't believe that there's any reason why we wouldn't be able to provide a link to anybody who wishes to join us online at that particular point of the meeting as a representative. That would be fine.
Thank you. Well, I believe that would value add to the opportunity to move the meeting times to commence at 3 p.m, seeing as it's a fairly business-like aspect of our roles that we do. But I would like to throw it open to my colleagues for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Further discussion of the item. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Look, I've given this a lot of consideration. I've been there when I first got in council. We did it at 6 o'clock at night, then we went to 3, then we've gone back to 5. And considering the value to move the time prior to the meeting that we've had workshops, and I know it suggested we could add half an hour onto other workshops, but I'm not comfortable with half an hour here and half an hour there. It doesn't give, in my view, the time required to have a decent discussion about a particular item. I'd prefer things stayed as they were. It's, you know, so I've given this a lot of thought, and I just think that the 5 o'clock time or even the 6 o'clock time suits me, well, not suits me, but suits the community better from my point of view than a 3 o'clock time slot, and allows us to get more done as well during the afternoon. And not everyone has to stay around for planning afterwards, as we've noted. So,
Thank you, Alderman King. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, I'm in support of changing the time to 3 p.m. I don't think, again, that it makes our planning process less transparent or less accountable. And I think that most professionals on both sides of the planning process would appreciate an earlier start. The meetings are still very accessible by the public. They're now streamed online, which is something that didn't happen, I don't believe, when we were first elected. So there's been a great improvement in making these meetings publicly accessible as well. So I think it's something that the planning staff particularly would appreciate, and also the people, the architects, etc., the people that are managing planning applications for proponents. They also have indicated that they would appreciate an earlier time.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion? Alderman Sims.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to, through the Mayor, speak to the motion. Firstly, I understand the temptation to support this change on face value, along with the previous motion that appears to many arguably to be a paradox in stark contrast with the community's clear call for more transparency, accessibility and overall improvement, particularly regarding local planning and development matters. Some of the factors previously communicated to you by me in aid of the workshop on this matter included the following arguments. Number one, and it's also confirmed in the reports provided to us on the for the agenda item. Number one, no community consultation took place. Council and Planning Authority meetings are one of the only rare interface opportunities for our council to garner regular, high-level, meaningful community participation. This process should be made more transparent, accessible and open, if anything. If our council, for any reason, is getting a lot of representations that aren't actually meeting the criteria and the discretions, that's a role as a council and alderman that we can do to support to ensure that they are more accurate and the community are actually empowered with the capacity in our role to help them align that correctly, rather than just kind of saying, oh, we're getting them wrong, let's just kind of shuffle that away. I think we've got a different obligation in our role as aldermen, and as aldermen, we can refer them to the Planning Act and the Land Use and Development. So that's our role as aldermen, to say, hey, yeah, I understand you're not happy with this in your backyard. Go to there. These are the things that you'll need to look at when the report comes out, the discretions, and you'll need to make, we can empower and support them through that process of making a representation. We put a completely different hat on and assess via a different scheme and criteria when we look at that. And that shouldn't be conflicting. We quite often follow different policy and process. It's not difficult to put a different hat on in a different job and make sure you're abiding by that governance and legislation. I don't find that difficult, and I think we all do that when we go from our other jobs to here, to the planning scheme, and to lots of different things. But yeah, so point 1, community consultation. It's noted in the report that didn't take place. And I think, in my view, it's a clear example of aldermen claiming to be approachable, friendly or responsive when advertising to the community individually or campaigning, but not actively living that out, their promise, when undertaking their duty as intended. Critical reflection.
Point of order, Mayor.
Conduct
Yes,
and how the
Dunsby. I ask you to stop, Alderman Sims. Alderman Dunsby's called a point of order. Alderman Dunsby.
I believe that Alderman Sims is casting aspersions on the role or otherwise of her colleagues, which I don't believe is appropriate. I also feel that the questions she's raising are not particularly relevant to this council agenda item, which is to do with the change of time. I just ask for clarification there.
I'm not asking questions. I'm speaking to the
Thank
motion.
you, Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Sims, I will rule on the point of order before you continue, please, and I will uphold that there were some casting of aspersions against colleagues there, so please refrain from, remember, my statement about work health and safety at the beginning of the meeting. Thank you.
I apologise for any offence caused in regards to any casting or perception of casting of assertions or offence taken. But I do think it is important, critical reflection upon aldermen's conduct is how this impacts outcomes just like this. And we need to think about that as well. Okay, I'll move on. Point 2, the original discussion points from the 2018, 2019 and 2020 workshops focused on this very subject of a time change and provided for the opportunity to explore the issues and risks regarding this time change. I'm wondering what's notably changed since those facts were explored and raised and those discussions took place that were led by the then Mayor Christy Johnston. Many of the points raised by me now were already assessed and measured as a major risk, which leaves me wondering why they are now again being cast aside. Number 3, staffing arrangements are also, in my view, not a justification in this case and shouldn't be mistaken for poor strategic leadership on anyone's behalf or workforce planning. Staff are already contracted and paid to attend regular meetings outside of regular hours. That's part of the reason why government officers, especially those employed at councils, get the so-called big bucks or the salary packages that they're entitled to. The issues outlined in the report do not factor in advanced HR or people or culture management that are tailored and suitable workforce planning arrangements. And that concerns me, and that links directly to transparency as well. Number 4, PMAT are the national leaders and award-winning planning advocacy alliance and advocacy group in the state. They've also formally recommended that the later starting time makes more sense. They're generally better for empowering community engagement and encouraging more local representations. Most people are required to work or will be at school pickup runs and are more likely to be deterred to attend or bother engaging on an issue at all until it's too late. In knowing this recommendation is not strongly supported by our own data nor the experts outside of council, and due to the lack of community consultation, breadth of information provided here in the report, and the fact it's unlikely to improve access for our community or improve better land use and planning outcomes overall, I will not be supporting this currently proposed time change from 5 to 3 p.m. And I can only suggest that my fellow councillors seriously consider the motion against verse what's best for our community and strengthening engagement and representation on local planning matters. In light of the unbiased facts, and that's not me considering that will be really inconvenient for people like me that have a full-time job and other obligations. People that generally are in these roles have other roles and they're usually leadership roles, and taking that time out at that time of day is inconvenient for me, as well as I'm sure it is the community, as I've spoken to here. So in line with the relevant information provided to our council and national planning and development advocacy experts, through the Mayor, I'd like to foreshadow a motion of a similar consideration or proposal that entails more relevant and meaningful action, including community consultation and the assessment of additional contributing factors, such as those I've outlined here today, in an evidence-based best practice format.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. So your foreshadowed motion, have you got that there to send through to our executive officer, if possible, please?
I can do. Would you like me to do that now? Because I can't actually do it while I'm streaming.
Would you mind reading it out again then, please?
Yep. So I'd like to foreshadow a motion of a similar consideration to the current recommendations or proposal that entails more relevant and meaningful action, including but not limited to community consultation and the assessment of additional contributing factors, such as those I've outlined here, in an evidence-based best practice format.
Can we note that, Executive Officer?
We'll get that from the recording of the meeting, Mayor.
Okay, sure. Thank you. We'll note that, and that will be considered should this motion be lost.
Thank you.
Sims. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey. Oh, we can't hear you.
My apologies. Thank you, Mayor. I'm more concerned about access as well. I do support a lot of what Alderman Sims has pointed out. My big concern is that maybe not so much with this council, but the new council could be elected in literally, 10 months or something. And we really need councils these days to be very dynamic and very diverse. And that will usually mean a lot more younger people and people who have jobs. And I'm worried that moving it to 3 p.m. is restrictive to people who want to contribute to the design of our city. So I think, the days of having a council full of retirees or people with limited work so that they've got a lot more time to be able to, arrive at 3 o'clock and do the reading, et cetera, is of concern to me. But given that we've just given away a lot of the delegation powers anyway, and we've restricted the GPA now to a shadow of its former self, and possibly even viewing and moving it into the council meetings, which, I don't think would be a bad idea at all, because I have been publicly critical in the past of, significant developments not being put before the whole council for discussion. So that would be the option that I would like to see, that instead of having separate GPAs, it actually becomes an agenda item on our council minutes as it is at Hobart and turns into a council meeting. I mean, they do have a separate committee, but then they have substantially more development to approve. But as we're growing and we will be attracting, I'm very positive about this, some very big and significant developments, I would like to see that, more and more comes before the council as a whole. So we actually get the 10 aldermen's views rather than, potential quorum of, is it 3 or 4?
5.
5, that's the quorum for
GPA. 5 is the GPA membership, so quorum is 3.
And the quorum is 3? Yeah, that's what I meant. So anyway, I just sort of say I'm okay to support it for tonight, because if we can change it from 5 to 3, we can change it back to 5 should we get a new council that needs that flexibility.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to ask what was the reason why we've chosen 3 o'clock? So it seems that's what we have had in the past. And was 4 o'clock actually considered?
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Director Fox.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. I understand that the 3 p.m. time was proposed because that was what it previously was. This was discussed at the November council meeting when we talked about dates. We could contemplate a 4 o'clock time, if that was of interest to Alderman. The 3 o'clock time was just what we were asked to investigate.
Thank you. And the reason for my question is I do take on board Alderman Sim's comment about 3 o'clock. It is quite an awkward time for people to be attending meetings. And I do also think that since that November meeting, the landscape has changed in what we have just approved in the previous agenda item. So, again, looking at the number of items that went to council in 2021, there are 56 items that went to GPA, and with the changes that we've just adopted, we'll be seeing a lot fewer items actually going to the GPA. So perhaps the reason for a 3 o'clock start isn't as critical as what it was when we actually considered this back in November. So I'd like to propose an amendment, Mayor.
Okay, I'll just take some advice on how we, there's already been a motion moved and seconded, so your amendment would need to be supported by the mover and seconder. No?
Yep, so the proposed amendment would be that rather than scheduling, so number 2, so rather than commencing at 3 p.m, commencing at 4 p.m.
Sorry, just bear with me for a second. I'll take advice from the Acting General Manager on the meeting procedure regulations here with an amended. So we've had a moved and seconded motion as it's written. We've then had a foreshadowed motion. How do we then accept an amendment?
Through you, Mayor, the correct procedure under the meeting procedures regulation would be for Alderman Carlton to move the amendment and for someone to then second the amendment and for then council to debate the amendment, vote on it, and to either accept the amended motion or not accept the amended motion, after which we would then proceed to vote on the original motion.
Right, sorry, thank you. I thought I was wrong there, so I did need to clarify that. Okay, so Alderman Carlton has moved an amendment for the motion as it stands, but to commence at 4 p.m. instead of 3 p.m. Is there a seconder for this amendment? Deputy Mayor. Right, we will now proceed to debate the amended motion. Does that mean we start again in terms of who can speak to the motion? Right. Alderman Carlton, would you like to open the debate?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So as I previously mentioned, I have put forward this amended motion after considering the debate that's happened around the table, weighing it up with when we did decide this in November last year. It was a slightly different landscape for GPA. Going forward now at GPA, we'll be considering fewer items, most likely because of the delegations that we have just approved. So as per the previous report, we should see less time in those actual GPA meetings. So the necessity of having an earlier meeting, I think, is reduced, and that would support a 4 o'clock time. It would also address some of the issues around public involvement in those meetings. Being 3 o'clock would actually be a significant hurdle for a large number of people.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Sims.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to the amendment. I appreciate Alderman Carlton's attempt here to on the spot make an informed decision around what our community needs. I still think we have an obligation to go out to community consultation, and considering the links to the motion that was just passed and how that will impact the GPA and perhaps amount of applications that make it there. I still think, it's really important that we consider PMAT, the national advocacy groups' feedback, and the fact community consultation hasn't taken place. As much as I appreciate Alderman Carlton's attempt here to push the time out, which I think will be more convenient and help a little, I still don't think that's the way we should be conducting this decision-making process, and I still will be in support of my foreshadowed motion, because I think it gives the opportunity for staff to come back and assess this in accordance with some of those obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Sims. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Dunsby.
Yes, thank you. I can see some merit to going to the 4 o'clock time. I understand if anybody has, issues with family pickups and schools and things like that, but, that the people who are in that situation may only have a one-off engagement. This is the planning authority. The other point that I feel is that the timing of council meetings and the days that we meet, which includes the planning authority, are decided by a council when they're elected, and that was made a decision made when this council was elected back in 2018. This is now looking at a review of that based on information put before us here today. I do think a 4 o'clock meeting, and in light of the previous decision, may see less items coming through, so we may still get it through within the business hours. And for me, that will meet the criteria for business people to be engaged in it, and take away that 3 o'clock pressure that some people do experience. But I think we need to point out that these meeting days and times were set with the agreement of everybody around the table when we were elected in 2018, and this is just a tweak of that. But I'm happy to hear from other people as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion? Alderman Fraser.
Yeah, look, this seems like a reasonable compromise. I mean, obviously, as I said, I don't have an issue with the 3 p.m. start. We all, when we took on this role, had to make some commitments in terms of time during the week when we need to be available for council duties. That's what the public pay us for. So, we all agreed that as far as possible, Mondays would be the day when we have council meetings, council workshops, GPAs, etc. Yeah, so look, no, I'm happy with the change. The reality is that there is very, unless it's a really contentious planning application, there's virtually no public interest in planning matters. That's the reality. If you look at how many people are looking at Facebook when you're streaming a GPA meeting, there's probably 3, 4, 5 people. There are consistently, unless someone has a direct interest in the planning application, virtually no one turns up in person to a GPA meeting just to observe. I mean, there probably only 1 or 2 people in the municipality that do that. So the idea that there's this strong, huge community mandate to have a later time, I think is an absolute furphy. And I think the most important consideration here is, when all of, mostly it's professionals that are involved in these applications, and having this during business hours will help them immensely. And as I said earlier, if there is public interest, of which I think there is very little, but if there is, these meetings are all streamed online. You can just hop on your phone and you can watch proceedings from wherever you are in the world. So yeah, but happy with 4. I think it looked like it wasn't going to be voted at 3 anyway, voted in at 3. So 4 is perhaps a compromise that will get this across the table.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion? Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. As Alderman Fraser pointed out, the majority of participants in GPA are usually professionals who prefer to work during business hours. Others with invested interest will attend a meeting irrespective of the meeting time. I do have a question, 2 questions actually. Just of Director Fox, how does the 4 o'clock, do you anticipate getting through a GPA meeting between 4 and 5? Is that the plan? Is that possible? Because the idea is to reduce the hours our staff are working and to reduce the pressure on our staff. My second question is, the report assures us that applications with a high number of representations would be accommodated at a time that is convenient for the majority, as was the case with the Windermere Bay development. What ensures this happens? Is this just do we put something formally in place to ensure that happens, or is that just a matter of course?
Thank you. Director Fox.
Thank you for the questions. In terms of the first question on the 4 p.m. timeframe, our staff, we've been messaging back and forth during this conversation, and we are comfortable with that. We think that will alleviate the pressure to complete the meetings, particularly now that the delegations have been approved by 5:30 when the staff are finished for the day. So that that compromise is very acceptable to us, and we understand that that may help some people who are troubled by the 3 p.m. time slot. In terms of your second question, for major developments such as with the deck redevelopment and Windermere Bay, with those that receive a large number of applications, we are of course in regular contact with the Mayor as the chair of the GPA around those applications and how they're progressing. And it certainly would be a matter of course for us to ensure that firstly we could accommodate the number of people who would want to have a look at those applications. And as you know, for Windermere, we went across to Elwick to a conference room there to make sure that we could accommodate the number of people who were interested in coming to that GPA meeting. So numbers and time that's most suitable for those applications. It's a very standard practice that we look at our list and determine what we need to do.
Thank you, Director Fox. I'm happy to support the 4 o'clock start then.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Alderman Ball.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Currently we have workshops prior to the 5 o'clock. So if you have 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, do you still anticipate having workshops before those?
Thank you, Alderman Ball. This is a consideration that we discussed at our workshop last Monday night, and we said that we talked about the opportunity to have workshops will definitely need to continue, that's really important that we have that workshop time. We talked about how towards the end of last year we really had a focus on streamlining workshops so that we were provided with papers with sufficient time and detail to be able to prepare and take as read. So we wouldn't need, so we have the ability to, if we have 2 workshops a month, we have the ability to fit potentially more items into those workshops. So very conscious of not wanting to lose workshop time, but also that there's been feedback from Aldermen that we need to streamline those workshops and have them better structured so that we're not effectively spending a lot of time being presented to, but having that question and answer opportunity. So certainly something we discussed. Would you like to add anything to that, Acting General Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I think that's exactly what we discussed and we've been talking about with our directors and managers for some time now, is that opportunity for you to have those questions ready for responses at workshops rather than just a constant presentation of information being fed to you. So where in our presentation previously may now be done in 30 minutes because it can ensure that you've had that opportunity for the pre-reading to ask any questions and for us to have questions built into those documents as well to have you thinking around the sorts of responses you should be asking about. So I certainly believe there's plenty of opportunity to mix up those workshops and to ensure that we've got the variety required during the scheduled periods of time each month.
We also noted that we have a longer workshop scheduled in March around budget, and that there is capacity, and Aldermen have indicated a willingness and a desire to have more of those opportunities throughout the year as well. So if we had a few times a year where we get together for longer to discuss the more strategic items, then we can cover off during those opportunities as well. But thank you, good question, Alderman Paul.
So we are having them on the day of the GPA, are we?
No. So if we were to have GPA at 3 p.m, we wouldn't have workshops following GPA. It's difficult to know what time GPA will finish.
And if it's 4 o'clock?
I would expect it would be the same. We wouldn't be having them on those days. So we would go
okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Bull. Any further discussion? Alderman Hickey. Oh, we can't hear you again.
Don't you love live streaming? This is just a point of clarification for myself, and I hope it's not going to embarrass anyone, but the decision around what it's costing for staff, do staff get time off in lieu for time after 5 p.m, or is it a paid overtime?
Acting General Manager.
Thank you. Look, traditionally we have had time off in lieu. However, we've found in recent years staff don't have the ability to take the time. There is no capacity. They are so busy, so we're actually paying overtime for those staff, and it's happening across council in many areas. So it's part of our consideration for cost cutting where we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman King?
Thank you, Mayor. Through your, I was about to say I support the 4 o'clock start because that means we've still got time to have a meeting beforehand, but you're telling me now we wouldn't have time for a meeting beforehand, a workshop for an hour or thereabouts, because we can get a lot done in an hour prior to that, I would have thought.
Yeah, our workshops typically commence at 3:30, although on the occasion we have commenced them at 3 o'clock, but certainly feedback at the workshop last Monday and from Alderman's been that none of us have enjoyed having rushed workshops, which has often been the case in recent times when we've had workshops prior to GPA, and then for GPA members rushing into a GPA meeting is not good preparation either. So
I agree with that. I thought rather than a rush to streamline one like you were talking about, I thought that might.
Look, I'm sure if the need arose, we would consider that.
Okay. So it's not hard and fast at this point.
No,
I mean, we could meet at 2 o'clock.
Everything's flexible. Look at this discussion we're having right now.
Yes.
Any further discussion of the item? No, I'll speak briefly to the item as I haven't spoken on either motions. Look, I feel quite distressed, if I'm going to be honest about it, that we have spent so long discussing what is a relatively simple item before us with quite good rationale behind it. Of all the things that come across our desk, of all the significant matters that come across our desk and often go through with very little discussion, to have so much discussion around this, I think ratepayers might be out there shaking their heads. I think GPA is something that, as a number of aldermen have pointed out, really is a business matter. Very few members of the public have an interest in planning authority meetings or decisions unless they are directly impacted, and even still, most often they won't make representations, or if they do make representations, they don't tend to come along to the GPA meetings. As we've heard, we've got significant development activity going on in our municipality, and our staff are so stretched. They have requested that we consider this change because they are working long hours as it is already, probably a lot of days of the week. And as the acting general manager has just said, it's got to the point where they don't have time to take time off in lieu. So this is one thing we can do to ease some of the burden, given that we don't have additional financial resources to employ more staff right at this point in time to deal with the increased development activity we have going on. I was very supportive of the 3 p.m. start time. I think 4 o'clock, that's 1 hour. Will we be able to get meetings done within that hour or so of business time left? I would hope so, but you just don't know. Sometimes the presentations by our planning officers can be very comprehensive and very detailed, and sometimes they warrant that because of the significance of the application. So I was very supportive of 3 o'clock start time. As I say, I think it's it's been quite a significant conversation for something that most people who we're representing in our community don't have too much regard for. And I think they'd rather we just get on with it and do what's best to look after everyone. So I'm not sure how I feel about the 4 p.m. amendment, because I was quite set on supportive of the 3 p.m. Time, but I will go back to the mover of the amendment, Alderman Carlton. Alderman Dunsby, do you have a question or?
Yes, I have a question for the director, please. Do we have an ability to structure the agenda so where items that may engage people from the business sector would be perhaps prioritised on the agenda so that they did fall into the business hours, and other matters may, if we ran later past business times, that may not have those representations, or judged on the representations? Do we have the ability to structure the agenda to cater for interest in the meeting?
Director Fox?
We can certainly, Alderman Dunsby, structure the agenda. The majority of applications are either the applicant or the consultants to the applicant are businesses. So it may be that we're unable to achieve all of the applications within the business hours, depending what time business hours are for businesses. But we can certainly look at structuring the applications on the agenda to try and get those ones that are definitely businesses and involve businesses first up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Alderman King, did you have a question? No, your hand's still up there. Okay, so back to the, any further questions or discussion? I'll go back to the mover of the amendment, Alderman Carlton, to close debate.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to my fellow aldermen for their input into the proposed amendment. I think it's all been said, so happy to put it to the vote.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. So we'll put the amended motion as the recommendation reads in the agenda with the change so that meetings are scheduled to commence at 4 p.m.
Now we're voting on the actual amendment itself, whether to accept the amendment.
Oh.
So the vote would be to the effect, Mayor, that the original motion is amended to accept, to change the wording of 3 p.m. to 4 p.m.
Right.
And we are voting on that one. If that is accepted, then we would go back to the amended motion to take a further vote on that one.
I'm sure you didn't have to vote to accept the amendment, only if you had a mover and seconder.
That is the correct procedure under the meeting procedures regulations.
Okay, so we will vote to whether we accept that amendment, as I just read, to change the motion to 4 p.m. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is Alderman Richardson, Alderman Carlton, Alderman Fraser, Alderman King, Alderman Bull and Alderman Hickey. Raise your hand if you are against. That is Alderman Dunsby, Alderman Sims and Mayor Thomas. So the amended motion is carried. Alderman Carlton, you don't want to open debate again, do you? Please. Is that's the procedure? We resume debate?
The original debate there, while and anyone who has already spoken to the motion has already spoken to it. So we pick up the debate on the original motion.
The amended.
As amended.
As amended, yes, the amended motion. Yes. Okay, so would anyone like to speak further to the motion? Alderman Carlton, would you like to speak to close debate?
No, thanks, Mayor. I think we've had plenty of conversation and using your words, I think it's time to get on with things.
Thank you, and I apologise for the meeting procedure regulation learnings that I'm still getting my head around. We don't have too many of these like this. So please raise your hand to indicate if you are for the amended motion. That is Alderman Richardson, Alderman Carlton, Alderman Fraser, Alderman King, Alderman Bull and Alderman Hickey. Raise your hand to indicate if you are against. That is Alderman Dunsby. Is that right, Alderman Dunsby? Yep.
Sorry, I actually put my hand up for a question. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, too late.
I just want a clarification of this particular motion. So this is the original motion that has now been altered. So am I not the one to close debate rather than Alderman Carlton? I just want clarification on that,
sorry.
please.
If Alderman Dunsby moved the original motion, which I believe she did, then yes, that's correct.
Oh, I apologise. Goodness me. Yes, would you like to close debate, Alderman Dunsby?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hopefully that's okay. Thank you. Look, I'm interested in all the debate that we've gone here, and I think it's been pointed out, this is predominantly a business-orientated area. Alderman Fraser spoke to that fairly well, and I think that they're the considerations that sit fairly predominantly for me in my mind, that we give the opportunities for the people who are predominantly engaged in this process to be involved. It doesn't have a lot of public involvement. I don't know that community engagement would make a difference if we went down this track. So for me, whether it's 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock, I think we're still giving an opportunity that's extended engagement for our business community. I believe that we now have the meeting stream, so anybody who can't attend the meeting can. We find that that is progressive as well. And things may change in the future with a new council, that they may make different decisions. But I do believe that at least moving it even back to 4 o'clock and not 3 o'clock, it does give some good support to our business community, to any proponents who may be involved, but also especially our planning staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. I apologise again. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for the amended motion. That is Alderman Carlton, Alderman Richardson, Alderman Dunsby, Alderman Fraser, Alderman King, Alderman Bull and Alderman Hickey. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are against. It's Alderman Sims and Mayor Thomas. The motion is carried. Whew. It's hot in here. I turn that aircon on. Item 13, Financial Performance Report to 31st of December 2021. We have a recommendation that Council receive and note the Financial Performance Report for the year to date ending 31st of December 2021 in the form of Attachment 1. Do I have someone to move this recommendation? Moved, Alderman Dunsby. Someone to second? Alderman Bull, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. It's really interesting to have a look at our report, and it highlights that our operating result is $2.460 million better than the budgeted position. This variance is obviously a result of increase in revenue and also decrease in expenditure, and anybody who goes through and reads the report can see the different areas there. So it's really positive that we have a favourable budget to actual operating position at the moment. We do highlight that we will have some increased liabilities that may be unknown, particularly around COVID and our capital works program and the increase in costs that we're facing there. I'm happy to throw it open for discussion with my colleagues now at this point.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Alderman Hickey. Oh, you're on mute again. Alderman Hickey, you're on mute.
My apologies. I'm just concerned about the revised estimates expenditure, which is on page 40 of 77, and it's item 6, the BMX bike track relocation. Unless I've missed something, the last time I had this discussion, it was enclosed, and so I wasn't certain of what the outcome of that was. And if it is meant to be enclosed, then so be it.
Yeah, thank you, Alderman Hickey. Yeah, you're right. We have had discussions about that particular project in closed council, and discussions continue to be had around that project and where we're going with it. So the report doesn't detail, my understanding is the report doesn't detail any project specifics other than looking at the revised budget estimate. Is that right, or have I missed something?
I guess it's just implying it's moving.
Not necessarily. We're just not spending that money in this financial year. So it's
I think
so the budget estimates were that we
no, I think we are spending the 25,000.
yeah, 25,000 we will be. Yeah, 25,000 has been expended on the project already, but it's a revised variance because we won't be spending that we don't expect to be spending that 435 this financial year on that project.
Yeah, so with your indulgence, Mayor, could I just ask that the Director, Emilio Reali, contact me offline on that subject?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Carlton.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a very pleasing report to read, and recognise that a lot of work has been put in by our staff. I did have a request for a update on something we talked about at an earlier meeting to do with the capital works information that's in the attachment. So it's page 26 of the attachments, or page 5 of the actual item attachment. So in previous meetings, we've had discussion around the way that this graph represents all of the capital works programs that council undertakes, and that includes large one-off projects, as well as the business as usual part of our capital works. And we did talk about breaking that information down into two types of graphs. So one is the projects such as KG5 and Chigwell versus the capital works that we would be spending each year on our regular capital works program. So I just want to get an update on how council officers are going in terms of looking at how that information is presented to us.
Thank you. Acting General Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Yes, we are preparing a report specifically on that, on CapEx, which will detail just what you've noted, and those reports will commence from next month.
Fantastic, thank you. That was my only question.
Thank you, Alderman Carlton. Any further discussion of the item? No, no further discussion. Oh, I'll go back to the mover then, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. Nothing further, Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 14, 2021-2022 mid-year budget review. Recommendation that Council approve the alterations to Council's 2021-2022 budget estimates set out in attachment 1, and specifically an increase in Council's estimated revenue of $550,000 to $64.03 million, and a decrease of Council's estimated capital works expenditure of $6.98 million to $19.19 million. Do I have someone to move this recommendation, please? Moved Alderman Richardson. Someone to second? Alderman Fraser. Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. No, this seems pretty straightforward adjustment considering the financial results we've been receiving. The recommendation doesn't alter the long-term management plan, financial manager plan, or the statement of financial position or cash position, with the alteration to capital expenditure and non-operating revenue. So, and it approves the bottom line. So I'm happy to support changes and open up the discussion.
Thank you, Alderman Richardson. Alderman Fraser.
Yeah, also happy to support the recommendations to make these changes. It's obviously important that the council and Aldermen particularly have a budget that reflects reality. And I think with regards to the capital works budget, we've known for some time that that hasn't been reflecting reality, and now it is. The reasons for that are largely outside of the council's control. So I'm not placing any blame on the council officers there. But yeah, I think it's great that that revenue has increased. But it's a shame that we haven't been able to get out a record-breaking capital works budget for this year. But there are lots and lots of factors at play there that make that incredibly difficult.
Yep. Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion of the item? Alderman Hickey.
I think it also highlights what a shoestring budget this council has to operate on. And even though we've had a good increase in the estimated revenue because of improved circumstances, it does distress me that we are not able to keep up with the capital works expenditure, but I do understand the pressing circumstances of not being able to get contractors, the rising prices, and I just don't know where that's going to end. But I think it's a matter for the public who might be listening that there are severe restraints placed on this council because of its financial resources. And so whilst people are quite unhappy with the state of our footpaths, roads and vegetation and other issues, it is because we are limited severely by funding. And so whilst we have this slight improvement, it's not necessarily because we were lucky or anything. It's actually because we've had to reduce money that would have been spent on capital works.
Thank you, Alderman Hickey. Any further discussion of the item? I'll speak to the item as well. I'm supportive of the revised budget, and I think it's good practice that it comes to us for revision in the mid-year, halfway through the financial year already. We've talked a lot about capital works budgets during the 4 years that I've been on council, and it has, it's been quite difficult each year to keep up for a whole wide range of reasons. I just want to clarify it with Director Riali in relation to our capital works budget this year and our expenditure. The delays are more in relation to the specific major projects grants in relation to sport projects. Is that right? Rather than we should be able to complete our road and footpath improvements. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, Mayor. The capital works program, the delays are mostly the major grant projects, the football or soccer redevelopment projects. So a lot of they've been rescoped and are ready to go back to tender or basically get a lot of things underway once we get the funding agreements back. So that's causing us delays there. But the roads capital program, footpath capital program, and stormwater will be completed as per the program, the schedule, so that they will be pretty much fully done. And we've got some other projects that have been delayed a bit, but will be finished this financial year, like the Eddie Street Club rooms and the landfill extension.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. I think it's worth noting that whilst, as Alderman Hickey says, we do operate on a shoestring budget, and we would love to have more money to expend on footpaths and roads. We are investing more this financial year than we have in the past in roads and footpaths, and we will be able to complete those programs, which is really promising and something definitely for us to continue to focus on when we have our 2022-23 budget discussions, because we know how important those things are to our community. Happy to support the recommendations. Any further discussion of the item? Go back to the mover, Alderman Richardson.
Thank you, Mayor. Nothing further to add.
Put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. It's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 15, procurement and contracts monthly report. We have a recommendation that council receive and note the procurement and contracts monthly report for the period from 7th of December 2021 to 18th of January 2022. Do I have someone to move that, please? Alderman Dunsby, someone to second. Alderman Richardson, Alderman Dunsby.
Thank you. It's almost purely a reporting process here. Very small amounts involved. I'm happy to accept the information that's been provided to us and open it up for any other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Dunsby. Any further discussion of the item? Anything to close debate, Alderman Dunsby? Oh, Alderman Fraser.
I was just going to say, Mayor, that actually, in my view, this amount was larger than we normally see in these exemption reports. But the reason, of course, for the interested members of the public is that there is only one supplier for the particular service that council was seeking, and that's why it's 102,000, which it normally wouldn't be quite that much.
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Any further discussion? Anything to close debate, Alderman Dunsby?
No, thank you, Mayor.
I'll put the recommendation to the vote. Please raise your hand to indicate if you are for. That is carried unanimously. Oops. Moving on to item 16, notices of motion. Questions on notice or without notice. We had a number of questions without notice from Alderman Sims from our December council meeting, and responses to those questions have been provided to Alderman Sims and to all aldermen this afternoon, and will be included in the agenda for our, in the minutes for our January meeting. Any further notices of motion or questions without notice? Alderman Fraser.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I do have a question without notice on the topic of bin springs. My observation is that most of the litter in our municipality is coming from people's recycling bins blowing over on recycling rubbish day. And I think I've raised this issue a couple of years ago, but I fitted bin springs to my bin at home, and it works really well. If your bin falls over, then it doesn't go everywhere. My question was, has council considered supplying bin springs for all of, all the recycling bins in the municipality? How expensive would that be, likely to be? Would there potentially be any external grant funding available for that sort of initiative?
Thank you, Alderman Fraser. Director Riali, would you like to respond or take that one on notice?
Thank you, Mayor. We do actually have available a rubber clip that's available to hold the lids down, so that if wind blows, it stays shut. But when the bins are actually picked up by the truck and inverted, the clip actually lets go and lets the rubbish fall into the truck. We do.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to, Emilio. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, because there are a few different versions available. We do have those available, and we do allocate upon request, especially for or badly wind affected areas. But we are considering putting them on sale at the council chambers so that people can actually purchase them, or we can look at the cost of getting them in bulk and see what we can do to make them more available if need be.
I genuinely think it would make a big difference to the amount of litter in the city. So yeah, if you could consider, and if maybe an initiative where all new recycling bins that go out to new houses are already fitted with bin springs, might be a good idea as well.
Okay, we can consider that in the initial bin allocation when people actually first receive a bin.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Director Riali. Any further questions without notice? Alderman Hickey.
Whilst we're on the very important subject of rubbish, could I ask the Director, are our bins actually made from recycled plastic?
Yes, a lot of them are. So I can't guarantee that all recycled plastic, but a lot of the bins, when they get damaged or redundant, they do actually go back to be shredded up and recycled into either new bins or other products like pipes and seats. And yeah, so yes, we don't just put them in landfill, we actually do recycle them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any further questions? That brings us to the end of our open council meeting at 7:59 p.m. Do I have someone to move that we go into closed council? Alderman Ball, seconded Alderman Carlton. Put the motion to the vote. Please raise your hand, indicate if you're for. That's carried unanimously. Thank you to members of the public who have joined us our live stream this evening. Stay safe out there, be kind to each other, and we'll see you for our February meeting.